Number 3, you need to figure out structures, pathways, and power sources. So who created the problem? Who is maintaining the problem? Who is a powerful person that can do something about it? And number 3 doesn't, when you're doing this, it's not, oh, who's the big adversary I'm going to go up against? In my work with USA Swimming, it's very, very cordial. It doesn't have to be, okay, I can't be an adversary with this person, because sometimes organizations want to change. It's a little bit slow. So when you're thinking about the pathways, okay, am I going to look at legislation? Am I going to look at getting a textbook change? What is the mechanism that can bring about change, and who are the people in charge? Number 4 is think of an ask. And I think I have a separate slide on that. So is the ask doable, and is the ask reasonable? And in advocacy, I think if people just change one thing or do one thing different, it's coming up with really good asks. Because sometimes, like, I've wanted to get involved with things, but I'm not quite sure what we're asking for. And if the ask is a boycott until, you know, that brings about the dissolution of an entity, then that needs to be clear, because otherwise there's a sense of, well, when is this fixed? What amount of progress is good enough? Does that even exist? So the ask really needs to be clear: what's doable and what's reasonable. And then reasonable for the organization to do, can they do it? When you're going to ask the person for this change, is it something that the organization can actually do? And that's really, really important. When you go to make the ask, you need to spell it out pretty clearly. Here's what I'm asking for. Provide resources if necessary. That's tricky, because you don't want to be providing free consulting services to a group. Like USA Swimming, when I talked to them about their material, I provided some evidence that there was a problem, and then they hired an outside organization to audit it, and then they cleaned it up. So with number 2, it's good to provide resources, but it's also good to set a boundary and say, hey, if you are interested in change, you're going to invest the resources to get the knowledge and tools you need to make this happen. Sometimes you could include a case study. So with USA Swimming, I tend to talk about what happened when I was a young swimmer, which it was horrible. But that way there's a personal connection. They know they're talking to somebody that was affected. Always connect to a larger issue. So even if I'm talking about my own situation, I want to keep in mind in the context of abuse in sport, that this is a pervasive problem. It's not about me. It's not about my perpetrator. It's not about Larry Nassar. It's a pervasive problem. And that helps, that really sets organizations up for a bigger obligation, because without connecting it, they'll think, well, we resolved this. Why are you still bothering me? Keep your messaging tight. So if you have people working with you, it's good to have talking points so that the organization hears similar things and that everybody is on the same page. A couple strategies that you can use when you make your ask is to highlight discrepancies. So Texas Junior Classical League, I was blown away, really, really impressed that they had a non-discrimination policy that they sent out with their application. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. So when I reached out about the gendered, stereotype-based contests, I said, hey, I'm really, really impressed with what you do in terms of non-discrimination policies. I'm noticing, though, that that's not really in alignment with this other thing. So if you can use the organization's own words or stated goals, that's where if they've released statements and claim to care about something, you can leverage that and say, wow, it seems like you want to care about this, or this is aspirationally you care about this. Here's something I've seen that doesn't align with that. The last one's very sad. Lots of people don't act or do anything unless there's something in it for them. So sometimes you could leverage things like image, or really empower the organization, frame it as an opportunity. You could be a real leader in this space. This is a great chance to, and name some things that would make them excited about it if they're not already convinced that, wow, this was a blind spot and we need to fix it. So afterwards, you provide the accountability. I keep a spreadsheet. I don't have a lot of, this year wasn't, there was not a lot of change, things I asked that I should have been reasonable, things I know other people asked about. felt a little bit stagnant. But I do keep track because there were a few instances of change. And then going to number 7, you want to build on success. So either you're following up to say, wow, we talked about this last year and I'm still noticing it's a problem. Or if they do something, even if it's small, you really need to let them know that it is possible to satisfy you and that it is possible, like to be recognized for moving in the right direction a little bit. And then number 8 is just move on and address other aspects of the problem. So social media, if you know me, you probably know me from the words I leave on the internet. Social media is a double-edged sword, but it does serve some purposes. So if you see me on social media, it is in the context of these steps. So lots of times people will say, well, how, you really, it's really unfair not to talk to the organization when, this is, part of something larger. So social media can provide awareness of the problem, opportunities to learn more about other aspects of the problem. You can identify allies that way. The Black Legislative Caucus in Virginia had seen one of my tweets and got involved. Delegate up in New York State is drafting legislation related to child sexual abuse or historic crimes based on something I had tweeted about. So it's a good way to find people with similar interests, and it's a good way to find people who can help. It also provides documentation because, as I said before, many people have been working really hard on this for a very long time. And with social media and the internet now, it's documented, and that is one of the main reasons I do essays. So just to get it out there, here's a problem, here's a snapshot of what's going on in classics in November 2019, here's something I asked for, because at a certain point, this shouldn't depend on an individual, and it doesn't. There's many people working for the same goal, some of whom I don't know, and they could see what I've done. They could use that. I found things that I know other people have done based on social media, and it's helpful to know that. Like, wow, I know you've heard about this before because I saw what so-and-so said and documented. And then number 5, because we have a tendency as a field not to have an appropriate level of alarm and discomfort, social media can cause a lot of pressure, discomfort, and alarm because it really is an emergency. I have a couple case studies, and I thought during this time, I'll probably just share one because I want to make sure there's time for questions. But if you think of a situation that you're facing or a problem, maybe you could kind of work through the steps and see about things that you can do that would be safe for you in your context. Okay, so I started teaching at John Hanley High School in Winchester, Virginia. It's a racially diverse school. I think we're about 68% free and reduced lunch. I walk into the Latin class and it's this oasis of whiteness. There's no problem with white people studying classics, but when there's that level of disproportionality, it's a problem. That becomes a racialized space, which I think Dr. Collins had mentioned this morning. So when I went through, I identified a problem, but how do I fix it, right? So what I ultimately figured out was that looking in the students in our attendance sheet, I could see their other coursework. I realized Latin was being treated as a gifted or honors course. So it was as disproportional as the AP and honors pre-collegiate programs. So my second step was coalition build. So I needed to think, who can help me out with this? In this case, I was new to the school. They had assigned me a mentor. I kind of talked it out with a couple people to kind of feel test the waters. For this one, I think with number 3, it was really a very collegial group effort. So the people who were able to fix the problem were also the ones, like we were on the same team. So I talked to my administrators and the school counselors, and I'm not able to stop tracking nationwide. I wasn't in a position to demand my school stop tracking, although they have done a lot to make that more equitable, which I'm really excited about. But I just said, hey, stop treating Latin as an honors course. So that was an easy ask, but how does that come about? So in terms of resources, I said, let everybody know about Latin no matter what, and here are some new talking points, which I then made sure everybody had. And then in terms of accountability, you know, I'd kind of keep track and ask students, how did you find out about Latin? What sounded interesting to you? So I just check in and make sure that they were hearing the right message from school officials, and look, they were. When new people would come in key roles, I would make sure that they had the same talking points so everybody was on the same page. I introduce myself, I say, hey, you might think this about Latin, but this is a course that needs to be treated like any elective. And then, you know, build on success. So from there, I was, you know, able to do more within my school. And in terms of addressing other aspects of the problem, one thing I would really like to see is for ACL and SCS to condemn Latin as an ability track course, because of the disproportionality in gifted and honors and AP classes. Students of extremely high intelligence they're left out. It's not a question of ability, it's a question of segregation. It's called second generation segregation. Given the history of our field, that's something where, in terms of addressing other aspects of a problem, that's something I have in mind to work on. So I'm going to stop my screen share and just kind of finish up. Okay. So, I mean, hopefully, I mean, one thing I think that's easy to do is say, okay, my classroom's good, so I'm good. But as long as that default representation is so toxic and is rooted in white supremacy, it is very important, and there's many resources out there to make our own classrooms equitable spaces to teach content ethically and responsibly, but we still have this hyperstructure that is rooted in white supremacy. So we often frame this harm in terms of, or we frame it in terms of harm for marginalized students. People could be upset in our classroom. People could feel like this is a hostile environment. And I think that's very valid. But the flip side of it is that, and Jermaine Bryant said this in an interview I did with him the other day about slave auctions in Georgia, that he's like, yeah, I don't want to be culturally protected. So if you're just looking at this from a feelings perspective, really missing the point. So I think that another thing to think about, just in terms of flipping it around, is, okay, yeah, this is harmful, hurtful, it's unethical, but what danger does this pose to white students? And there was a point where I'm using material as prescribed, I'm going through my textbook, and I just thought, am I grooming white male students for white supremacy? And that was a moment where I really thought, okay, I have to do more. Like this is not okay. I should be able to open up my textbook or open up a resource from a publisher and use it without worrying about how a student is going to internalize that. Because a lot of this tends to come across as a celebration of white dominance, which in today's world is extremely dangerous. So, I mean, it is discouraging to talk about the realities of our field, but the good news is we're thinking about it, and we're doing things about it. So I hope that moving forward, you could think of ways to leverage your power in areas that you can control entirely. And that's great when you can say, hey, I'm going to start teaching this better. And that's a great change. But also to think about ways to participate in larger scale change. What do you think you can't do? Who do you need to make this change? And then, you know, really come up with a game plan to make that happen. So that's all I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm really easy to find. My DMs are open if you want to slide in and ask me anything. My email address is my Twitter handle @Gmail. I really welcome dialogue and engagement on this. So thanks.